I'm in Prestwick on the seafront, and there's a slightly bitter smell of seaweed, sea wrack on the air, bracing and rather chilly for the time of year. It's June. There's a light aircraft overhead which has just taken off from what I was taught to call the aerodrome, because that's what Grandpa Curry called it, the central feature of Prestwick. Now, of course, much expanded for Ryanair. This is, of course, the ancestral route of the family on my father's side, and I came here many times as a kid to visit my Grandpa Curry, who was a man who served in the First World War in the trenches, something to do with observation balloons, but never spoke about it, and was a very devout Christian, a very gentle man with thick lips and a bald head, and who went for constitutional walks and went for tea every day with his daughter Molly.
But he was a very family-orientated fellow.
I was going on a walk around these streets and thinking of when he walked every day, basically, and went for a constitutional walk.
Yes, he had a walk every day. And then, of course, the back gate opened out onto a golf course, and he could walk over there.
And what do you think was running through his head when he went for these walks? What would he be thinking about?
Oh, he was very contented and placid. Would you say placid? I don't remember seeing him in a tizzy, if you know what I mean.
Never. And would he look at the flowers in people's gardens, or
yes?
Would he think about the weather, or would he be thinking, praying perhaps, or?
No, I would be just enjoying the outdoor.
Right.
He could only walk latterly. He could only really walk a short distance.
Yeah.
And so he would walk a short distance, which might be 50 yards or something, and he would lean on his stick or lean against the wall or just chat to whoever passed by, but in a quite contented sort of a way. So you're right,
yes.
It could have been just admiring the garden.
And you said he lifted his hat to all the ladies he passed.
Yes, and he would talk to anybody, really. He was a very friendly person.
He was, yeah.
And he sometimes, if there was a beggar came to the door, he wondered just what the circumstances were and if he should help him and that kind of thing. He was thoughtful.
Right.
He used to walk with a stick as well, I remember, in a very gentlemanly manner. It wasn't really for support, but it just part of his style.
Yes, and it was a do and then up and do and up.
His wife died when she was in her 50s of some sort of leukemia or something, I'm not sure, Elizabeth Curry. And he worked for the railways as a clerk all his life and had free railway travel, but didn't use it. Although he did go up to the Highlands a lot, and he was a sort of freelance preacher. He was such a devout Christian, a member of the Plymouth Brethren, which I think my cousins and my aunt still are, that he went up and just did this sort of soapbox preaching. Getting into this sort of landscape that he lived in now, these separate bungalows, modest houses that remind me a bit of Japan. In some ways, the tidiness of the gardens, the sort of gravel arrangements are almost zen. Very careful gravel, and I just passed a house that had a little bonsai tree in the window, so even more Japanese. Towards the end of their marriage, I remember my mother chivying my father about how he'd just made one leap. I've got an audio recording of it, actually. You've just made one leap from Prestwick to Edinburgh and to the society, the genteel society of Edinburgh's new town. But this was a kind of I know where you're from line. I know your roots. I've seen the machinery of your social ascent, and it's not that impressive. So it's funny, I expected to hear jets from the airport, but I can hear one now, and I can see a seaplane taking off, actually. But it's not very noisy. It looks on the map as if the Prestwick International Airport is right next door to this area, but it's actually not. So I'm coming up behind, I'm coming through a park with tennis courts and things to behind my grandfather Curry's house, which I haven't visited since the early 80s. This is your moment.
This is my moment. I'm Adrian, in case you don't recognise me from the colour of my hair. But Nicholas has asked for a little memory of Grandpa Curry. So I have one when we used to go down for tea on Sunday nights. He would, just Marcus and I at that stage, he would tell us stories about his younger years, and once I remember him describing the experience of being in the trenches in the First World War when he first saw a tank. It was a German tank, and he was there with his rifle and talked about how vulnerable he felt when this huge lumbering beast came rolling across the land. So that's one little snippet of Grandpa Curry.
Right. One thing I find really remarkable coming back to Britain, and especially this part of the west coast of Scotland, is the intimate relationship the people here have with the clouds. You have landscape below and you have cloudscape above, and they're very close to each other, and they sort of resemble each other, because below it's a rolling greeny grey countryside, and above it's a rolling grey cloudscape, and it's almost like a thinking cap. It's something you pull down to have a certain state of mind, to think certain thoughts. Manchester, Glasgow, these are cities with very little sunshine, mostly this rolling Atlantic cloud just coming in from the west, and a certain humidity and constant rain, constant changes of weather as the wind blows different types of clouds in, and occasionally little windows in the cloud. And you see Britain locked under this cloud when you fly in from another country. Europe often sunny and clear, and then suddenly this low cloud over Britain, and it's not just one layer, it's maybe 5 layers. The plane has to descend through different types and layers of clouds. And it really has changed the music of Manchester. You can hear it in that, in Joy Division and stuff like that, and you can probably read it in the literature of Scotland as well. Okay, you're on.
Hi, I'm Mark. My memory of Grandpa, when he was older and really quite frail and couldn't go to church anymore, I remember going into his house one night, because we could just walk in the front door if he didn't hear us, and he was sitting in the back parlour, the back room, and he was singing psalms to himself, which I thought was lovely. It just kind of summed up the man.
Right, he loved psalms.
He loved the Psalms.
He did.
I'm following the route of a constitutional walk that my grandfather would probably have taken around these streets near his bungalow, occasionally interrupted by the sound of drilling, people whistling and drilling in their back gardens. As in Japan, there's a kind of workshop element to the houses here. The gardens are a bit bigger here. Would you say he was elegant? I mean, did it matter to him that he had a good suit? He always seemed very impeccably dressed when I saw him.
Well, he had his Sunday rig out. Sunday rig out, and yes, I don't remember him being shabby in any way.
I mean, in those days you didn't wear informal, you wouldn't walk around in tracksuits and things. So.
No.
No.
And he used to tell us stories, and when we were young, it was into bed, tell us a story about when you were a little boy. And he lived in Kilbarcan.
Yes.
That's a village, really, or it'll be a town now. And they had great times in Kilbarcan.
And that would be, when was he born? He was born in the 19th century, wasn't he? He would be born just before the turn of the century.
I couldn't give you the date, but it would be...
I think that's right.
1898 or something.
He was 80...
How old was he when he went to the war? He must have been
He would just be about 18.
18.
18, and that was 1914.
That was 1914, so that
Yeah,
was
and he was in France in the trenches,
Yeah.
which were just dug out.
So he came from the 19th century, one of the few people that I would have met who came from the 19th century.
Yes. But he was a very contented fellow,
Mm.
my father. He didn't complain.
No,
Did you ever hear him complaining?
Never complained. No.
He came up every evening and had his meal with us.
Yes.
And then he just, away back down again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very contented.
I have a recurrent fantasy of buying my grandfather's old bungalow and taking up residence and living here, because I've come full circle. The things which seemed exotic to me when I was younger and that drew me to Paris and New York and Tokyo are now replaced by the most exotic possible thing, which is for me to come back to my roots and to my family places. And of course it's never going to happen. I'm never going to come and live in his bungalow, although actually one of my cousins did inherit the bungalow and was living in it for a while, but I think has sold it since. I'll hear more about that later from him. But I try to imagine what my life would be like here. But what is my life in Osaka? I live in a house and I go for bicycling trips and make my music, and I'd probably live in a very similar way here, and I'd have the internet, so it wouldn't be a great wrench. But I wonder if the slightly damp and prim atmosphere would seep into my work in some way, or if it's already there, genetically imprinted. There is some sense for me of Noddy in Toyland or Rupert the Bear about the landscapes here. I'm just passing a rounded corner with a very tidy path with red gravel going up to the front door of a bungalow, and little yellow flowers, I don't know what they are, planted in a row around the curved wall. And of course it's a utopian suburban vision from the 1940s, and Noddy and Rupert somehow sum it up for me. There's something lyrical in Rupert, actually. If you look at the way it's drawn, there's almost some Art Nouveau thing. There'll be foxgloves, there'll be strange dells and dingles and things. And nooks and bowers. So dells, dingles, nooks and bowers. That's the lexicon of these gardens. Sometimes I wish I were Jonathan Meades, because I'm actually wearing the Ray-Bans that he would be wearing if he were here with a BBC film crew making one of his wonderful television essays. He made, I think, 4 in Scotland, which were very good, one about Aberdeen. So he would make mincemeat of the twee and primness of some of these bungalows, I think. Affectionate mincemeat. Perhaps Christmas mince pie meat. I don't like it when people have put new doors on, like my grandfather's house has a new door. Renovations, of course, are the enemy of the nostalgist. But I do like, for instance, the top of the wall that I'm passing just now has a lot of lichens and mosses. And I suppose it's the damp weather, but there are bluebells behind it, and then this texture on the top. My grandfather, William Curry, was a tall man, well-built, and I imagine him walking on these streets on his walks, possibly towards the end of his life with a stick. But generally he was hale and healthy, and I wonder what he did, if he was just thinking about his life, praying to God, perhaps. There's a palm tree in this garden. Or was he looking at the flowers that people grow as a kind of PR or a kind of communication with passers-by? Beautiful blooms. Just passing a house called Ashray. All the houses here have names. My father's house is called Minicoy. I don't know what that means. It might be Gaelic, derived from Gaelic. We're in Coyle Avenue here. It's really a maze, but all the houses look the same, so you have no orientation. You don't know what's north, south, east and west. A couple of benches arranged on the gravel next to a barrel with some flowers in a little nook, again a nook, out of the wind. Because, of course, you're right next to the sea here, and the wind is a constant factor. You have these, for me, interesting because rather inexplicable arrangements of lawn, gravel, brickwork driveway and concrete, low walls, bushes, shrubs, plants. People park their cars within their gates if they have a big enough driveway. Most of them do. Often there are just 2 solid tracks for the car tyres, and in between those there's some gravel. So the kind of, I'd almost call it ceremonial gravel, is everywhere. That's the most distinguishing feature. Sometimes some beautiful rhododendrons and other bushes. A little pine tree, decorative palm. Because you're right on the Gulf Stream here. You're on the sea, and the Gulf Stream is coming up in between Scotland and Ireland and keeping it very mild. The sun is now shining. It's actually about 25 degrees. It's getting hot. It strikes me that the bungalows here might be a suburban expression of the Highland architectural and island architectural template of the button ben. Some of them are shaped like button bens, and you would have your own button ben in a row of them. Normally they'd be in a landscape out on their own in the countryside, but here it's an urban or semi-urban button ben situation where it's a single-story dwelling. A bungalow makes you think of American suburbia, but this is more like a domestication and urbanization of the Highland button ben. And you have your parlour, your front room, which people can sort of see across the garden from the street. You can see into these windows. They have some kind of curtains which are drawn back, and that's your public room. And then you have your bedroom and kitchen. And some of these have extensions. They have rooms under the roof, so there are window bay extensions on the roofs, or just skylights. And of course my father would have been brought up under just such a skylight. You had to climb a ladder to get to his part of the house, because it wasn't really an official part. So I'm by the sea now, and it's quite a heavy sea, quite windy, bracing evening sea. The low tide, when I was here earlier, was exposing a lot of sand, but now there are just these fingers of spray splashing onto the walkway, and cormorants are bobbing in front of the waves and then diving at the last moment under them. And I had I had lunch with my relatives, and it was very interesting actually to see them after 30 years.